Hey everyone, it is Maya Gangadaran again for Wellness Wednesday. And today what we're going to be talking about is digestion and stress. And so hopefully you got a chance to click the link on the Facebook page and download the coloring page and the audio that is all about proper digestive function. If you didn't, no worries. You can take a minute and do that after you finish watching this class. And we're actually going to do this as a two-part series because there is a lot to talk about when it comes to digestion. But I want to start just with a quick review of what we talked about the last time I was with you, which is the autonomic nervous system, or the ANS. And so if you remember, the ANS has two different sides of itself, two different sides of the coin, so to speak, two different personalities, if you will. One of them is called the sympathetic pathway, and the other one is called the parasympathetic pathway. And the two personalities cannot express themselves at the same time. And that's probably the most important thing to remember when we talk about digestion and stress, because the sympathetic personality of the ANS is the fight or flight side of the personality. So this is the part that kicks in when you feel threatened or when you're in some kind of an extreme hot or cold environment. It is that survival mechanism kicking in to help you make your way through whatever stressful situation is occurring. The parasympathetic side of the ANS is sometimes called rest and digest. Sometimes it's called breed and feed. And so remember, if the two can't be expressing themselves at the same time, that means when stress is on, digestion is off, right? Because stress is fight or flight, that's sympathetic. Digest is breed and feed, or rest and digest, and that is the parasympathetic expression of the autonomic nervous system. And remember, you don't really have a lot of conscious control over the different systems that the nervous system, the ANS, controls, but you do have some control over which side of the ANS is expressing itself in a given moment. And that is super important when it comes to digestion. So the first thing I want you to think about is, where does digestion start? So a lot of people would say digestion starts in the mouth. And that is actually closer to the correct answer. Instinctively, sometimes people want to think that digestion just sort of only occurs in the stomach, but it actually occurs well before then. Believe it or not, it occurs well before the food gets into your mouth. So think of it this way. Remember the last time that you walked into your favorite bakery, right? Or you walked into your favorite restaurant, or you walked into a friend's house and they were cooking or they were baking something amazing. Think about what immediately starts to happen in your body. And it's possible that it may have already started to happen, because when I think bakeries, I think of one of my favorite bakeries. They bake my favorite croissants. And so already my mouth has started watering, right? Because I'm thinking about food. So if your body starts to prepare for digestion, because salivation is part of preparing for digestion, when you're just thinking of food, imagine what happens if you're actually smelling food, or if you're actually looking at food. As a side note here, this is part of why we do want to make eating a full sensory experience, because you are taking in all these different aspects of food, the way it looks, the way it smells, the texture of it. That is all really, really important. And that is where the whole concept of mindful eating becomes critical. So digestion really starts in the brain with information that you're taking in through your senses, or simply because you start thinking about food. And so the minute you start thinking about food, smelling food, seeing food, your body starts to respond, because digestion is a very, very intensive process. It consumes a lot of energy and a lot of resources in the body. So the body wants to start preparing for digestion as soon as possible. So digestion starts in the brain. And what can often go wrong with this step is that we don't eat in that all important mindful state, right? So many of us are eating in the car, maybe on the way to work, maybe on the way to the grocery store, but we are eating in in a distracted way. And oftentimes, even worse than eating in a distracted way, we are actually eating in a stressed out kind of scenario. So, for example, if you are eating in rush hour traffic, if you're used to scarfing your breakfast down, your morning coffee, your breakfast sandwich, whatever it is, if you're used to eating that in the car, in that stressful situation, that is going to shut down your digestion from the get-go, right? Because all your body knows is that it's stressful. It can't tell the difference between that, proverbial bear or tiger that may have been chasing us before civilization and somebody that just cut you off in traffic, or the fact that you're running a little bit late to work. And so when you're in that stressful situation, you are in sympathetic mode. You are in stress when stress is on, digestion is off. So what are you going to do about that? It's really important to make sure that you are in a calm, relaxed state when you are eating. So whether that means for you saying grace, or just thinking about the gratitude that you feel for your meal. Maybe you decide to take 3 to 5 deep cleansing breaths, as we call them. That's really how you want to be eating. And you want to be definitely sitting down. There are a lot of us who, we get home at the end of a long work day, and, we're sort of eating, but we're eating while we're cleaning the kitchen, or we're eating while we're just sort of, walking around the house in an aimless manner. Your body doesn't register that kind of activity as being in a calm, relaxed state. And remember, digestion starts in the mind. So if you are calm and relaxed, your body will be able to turn on digestion. It will be willing to expend the kind of energy that you need to be able to digest your food properly. If you're running around in a stressed out state, it's very likely that your body will turn off digestion, because you don't want to waste energy if you have a stressful situation that you need to address. So when stress is on, digestion is off. Very, very important to eat sitting down and in a calm, relaxed state. So the next step of digestion happens in the mouth. And like we said, the minute you smell food, see food, or even start thinking about food, your mouth starts to water, right? Saliva becomes produced. And there's a lot of talk about chewing your food and how important it is to chew your food. And of course, this is ideally the step that is happening at this point in time. You are chewing your food, you're chewing it until it's almost in a liquid state before it goes on to the next part of the process. And so part of chewing is breaking the food down physically, right, with your teeth, so that it will be more processed by the time it gets to your stomach. But the other thing that's going on in your mouth is that there are enzymes. There are enzymes that break down protein. There are enzymes that break down fat. There are enzymes that break down carbohydrates. And those are also starting to work on the food at a chemical level. Now, first of all, if you're not eating in that calm, relaxed state, your body is not going to produce these enzymes as prolifically as you may want them to start that process. So that goes back on up to the state of mind that you're in when you're eating. But remember that physical process is important as well. And so many people do not chew their food. It's a very common problem. A lot of times it's happening because we're not mindful. We're not thinking about the food that's in our mouth. We're thinking about the rush hour traffic, or we're thinking about, the meeting that we're eating in the middle of, or whatever it might be. A lot of working lunches out there where people are working right through lunch, dealing with stressful items through lunch, and that stress is hampering their digestive system. So a lot of people are just throwing the food in their mouth and they're wolfing it down. If you are a fast eater, it is very likely that you are not chewing your food appropriately. And some people will take the approach of counting, right? Counting every time they chew. If you're into that, if you like that, if it works for you, I encourage that. I think you probably only need to chew your food maybe around 20 to 25 times. There are people I know that chew each bite of food 100 times. I think that's a little bit excessive. If you're like me, however, you don't enjoy the idea of counting every single time you chew the food in your mouth because it is not very pleasant. It doesn't really allow you to focus on other things that are going on if you're eating in a lovely environment. It can be a little bit consuming to be counting every single time you chew. It can get a little tedious. It can feel like a job. So I'm going to give you a trick to try instead. And that is to put your utensils down in between bites. And even better, if you can put your utensils down and then put your hands in your lap. What tends to happen when you do that is you focus on the food in your mouth rather than thinking about the food that's on your fork, because that's one thing that I noticed as I was trying to make this change in my life. I noticed that when I'm still holding my utensils after I've put a bite of food in my mouth, what I tend to do is get the next bite, right? Stab the next piece of chicken breast or steak or, or vegetable or whatever it is. And when I'm sitting there and looking at a bite of food on my fork or on my spoon or in my chopsticks, what am I thinking? Whoa, I better get that bite of food into my mouth. And the only way to do that is to swallow what I currently have in my mouth. And so that really, in a very subtle way, can speed up the whole chewing process. So, what I want you to do is put a bite of food in your mouth, put your utensils down, put your hands in your lap. You will naturally turn your attention to the food that's in your mouth. And you won't chew your food when it's still pretty much basically a solid piece of food that is in your mouth. Okay. So that is a really easy, really simple trick to put your attention on chewing your food so that the enzymes are able to do their work, your teeth are able to do their work, and the food is going to get into your stomach in a more advanced state that's going to be easier for your stomach to digest. You want to let every part of the system do its job, and this is one of the ways that you can do that. So, the next thing that I want to talk about is actually, we are going to talk about digestion in the stomach, but I want to talk about another subject as well, which is heartburn. Heartburn is a very, very common problem in the world today. There are a lot of people in the world that are on some kind of acid suppressing medication, or they're popping antacids like they're, Pez, or in some way they're trying to control that burning sensation in the esophagus that they get after eating. And what I would like to suggest to you is that the problem very frequently is not that your stomach is overproducing acid. It's actually that your stomach is underproducing acid. Um, those of you that are on acid blocking drugs right now, I certainly would not advise you to just cold turkey cut those drugs based on what I'm telling you. But I do think it might be worth trying some of the strategies that I'm going to be teaching you, and B, talk to your doctor about doing a test to make sure that you actually are overproducing acid. There are a couple of different ways to do this. They are not particularly expensive. They don't tend to be particularly invasive. They don't tend to be done because many doctors are simply trained that if you have heartburn, we're going to put you on an acid blocker. And so they don't necessarily take that extra step. So first, let's talk about what might be going on instead of your stomach overproducing acid. So your stomach requires a relatively high acidity to properly digest your food. There are cells in the lining of your stomach called G cells, and they are the cells that actually produce the hydrochloric acid. Yes, that's the same hydrochloric acid that you used in chemistry class when you were in high school or when you were in college. That hydrochloric acid is extremely good at digesting animal proteins. And so that's a lot of the work that's done in your stomach, is to digest those animal proteins, break them down into the smaller amino acids so that your body can use those amino acids to rebuild your tissues, right? Now, one thing that I do want to say is that naturally over time, just as part of aging, the G cells will decline. I mean, that's really kind of the definition of aging, is that cells die and the body doesn't replace them as well or as quickly. And so it's very common as we get older to produce less stomach acid. Again, that's just kind of the natural part of aging. However, when we're younger and even when we're older, one of the things that can be going on is that because we're eating in that stressed out state, we are under producing stomach acid. Because again, remember, I'm going to say it a million times, when stress is on, digestion is off. So it is possible that when you're eating in that stressed out state, you are not producing enough hydrochloric acid from your G cells to properly digest the food and also to properly acidify the food. One of the other names for the stomach is the acid barrier. And that is a very, very important job. Maybe not as important now as it was before the ages of refrigeration and other means of making sure that food doesn't spoil. But before we had those types of technologies, it was not unlikely that food that we were eating was compromised by either bacteria or potentially viruses. Now, bacteria and viruses are comprised of protein. And what did we say? Hydrochloric acid is really good at breaking down protein. And so part of the job of your stomach, with its high acidity from all that hydrochloric acid, is essentially to sanitize your food. So part of the job is to digest, part of the job is to sanitize. And what makes both of those jobs easy to execute well is a high acidic level in the stomach due to hydrochloric acid. So let's pretend like you are eating in a stressed out state and your acid production is compromised. There is a valve in between your stomach and your small intestine. It's called the pyloric valve. And the pyloric valve doesn't like to open unless the food in your stomach, which is technically called chyme, it does not like to open unless the chyme is at the proper level of acidity. And so that is a safety net, right? That's a safeguard, because if that chyme hasn't been properly acidified, then it's very possible that antagonistic bacteria and viruses may not be neutralized, right? They may still be alive and kicking. And if we let them through the pyloric valve into the small intestine, they are going to be able to make their way into the bloodstream. And the body does not want that, because that is bad news. That is where you can cause a lot of potential sickness and even infection. So we want to have that high level of acidity in the stomach. Now, if you're eating in that stressed out state, you're not properly acidifying the chyme because you don't have enough hydrochloric acid. What can happen is the pyloric valve will just seal up. It's going to keep that chyme sitting in your stomach. So if you are a person who, 3 hours, 4 hours after your meal, you still feel full, it's very possible that you're not producing enough hydrochloric acid to properly acidify your food. So think about this. If you ate a meal, let's just say you had a chicken breast, you had some, steamed broccoli with melted butter, because healthy fats are very important, and maybe a sweet potato. Okay, that seems like a really healthy meal. I think most people would consider that a healthy meal. Think about what would happen if you put all those foods in a blender and you blended them up, and then you put them in a room that was about 98 degrees for a couple of hours. That food would obviously start to age in a less than desirable way. And so in that kind of a situation, what will happen is the food will start to back up into the esophagus. And while it might not be acidified enough to make the pyloric valve happy, it can still be acidified enough to burn your esophagus, because your esophagus is pretty delicate in that way. It's not used to being in a high acidity environment. Your stomach has all kinds of protections built in. Your stomach it excretes mucus to protect the lining of your stomach from that acid. Your esophagus doesn't have that kind of protection. And so even a lower acidity can cause that burning sensation in your esophagus that we interpret as being heartburn. So again, things to look for this. If you are a person who, again, takes a really long time to digest food, your food should be cleared out of your stomach within about 2 hours. So again, hour 3, hour 4, if you still feel really full, it's very possible that you're having an issue with hydrochloric acid. If you are a person who gets heartburn on a regular basis, again, I don't want you to just cold turkey quit your acid reducing medicines. You always need to talk this over with your doctor, but I think it's worth trying some of the tips that I'm going to talk you through, and maybe even talk to your doctor about testing to make sure that the problem really is that your stomach is overproducing acid. There are some situations, there are some conditions. There's a genetic condition that can cause that. There are a few other conditions that can cause that, but it's not as common as the number of people who are taking acid reducing drugs just with, willy-nilly and for very, very long periods of time. So what do you do about it? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to start eating in a calm, relaxed state. Remember, when stress is on, digestion is off. And so that's really going to be important if you suspect that you might have some issues with underproducing stomach acid. Make sure that you're sitting when you eat. One of my teachers, when I was going through nutrition school, she actually said that she liked to have a picnic. She almost always would eat on the floor with a bunch of pillows, because for her, she was historically someone who ate really, really fast. And for her, there was something about sitting on the floor. It just felt like a picnic, and she would relax and she would slow down. You don't have to do that. If that doesn't sound like a lot of fun for you, don't do that. But find your own way to eat in a calm, relaxed state. And make sure that you're not distracted from your food. Make sure that you can really focus on your food. It's great to eat in good company, because frequently when we're eating in good company, we're talking, we're listening to other people. It gives us an opportunity to slow things down and enjoy the experience of eating. The other thing that I want you to do is make sure you're chewing enough. You want to make sure you're putting your utensils down in between every bite and really focusing on the food in your mouth, because if the food gets to your stomach in a better state, it's going to be easier to digest. There are a couple of interventions that you could consider. One is using digestive bitters. And for all my craft cocktail fans out there, yes, I am talking about the same kind of bitters that go into craft cocktails. The point of those aperitifs, those pre-meal cocktails with bitters in them, was actually to stimulate the digestion. That bitter taste, when our tongue registers that bitter taste, it kicks the digestive system into high gear. And there are some theories about why this is. My favorite, my pet theory about why the bitter taste stimulates digestion is that many poisonous foods have a bitter taste. And so the theory is that over time, the human body has learned that if it tastes something bitter, it better just ramp up that digestion so we can move that poisonous food out of the system as quickly as possible, so that it does as little damage as possible. So that's my favorite pet theory for why the bitter taste stimulates digestion. So you can go to your local fine liquor store, you can go to a local grocery store, and you could literally just use the bitters that they have there. You can also go to, of course, a health food store. They will have digestive bitters there. They usually come in a dropper. One thing I will caution you against, please read the ingredients label. You don't want to be habitually using bitters that contain senna. Senna is an herb that that can become a little bit addictive when it comes to digestion. Senna is often used if you're familiar with Smooth Move tea. You know, any kind of a tea that you're taking, if you happen to be constipated, it usually contains senna because senna will help with that. But if you use senna habitually, you will not be able to go without senna. So I don't recommend Swedish bitters commonly have senna in them. So I don't recommend Swedish bitters on a regular basis, but there are many different kinds of bitters that are out there at your health food store that you can use. And typically you just need a few drops of it on your tongue, 15 to 30 minutes before your meal, and that will kind of prime the pump and get the system all ready to go for you. I recommend that if you are in your 30s or younger, that you start with the bitters. Start there, because for you, it may just be a situation where you just kind of need a little jump start, right? Now, if you're older, if you're getting into your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, remember what I said earlier, over time, the G cells die off, the body doesn't replace them. And so our ability to make hydrochloric acid, it just kind of diminishes. And so in that case, you can use a hydrochloric acid supplement. It would be a tablet that you can take. I have a couple of different brands that I like to use. And you would take that with your meal. So after the first few bites of a meal, you would take your hydrochloric acid, and you're just basically supplementing what your body isn't as able to use anymore. Now, these are both relatively benign supplements. However, I will say that in some cases, some people, especially if you have kind of a leaky gut situation going on, which we're going to talk about in our next Wellness Wednesday next month when I come back, you may not want to start out by increasing hydrochloric acid, because if you're having some issues with leaky gut, if you're having some tissue sensitivity, you don't necessarily want to add more acid into that situation. So again, you know, if you suspect that might be an issue for you, you can start with the digestive bitters as well, because the bitters don't add hydrochloric acid. They just sort of prompt your body to make hydrochloric acid. Also keep in mind, you need to have the building blocks to make hydrochloric acid. Well, hydro is water, chloric is chloride. And so an easy source of chloride is sodium chloride, which of course is going to be salt. I recommend in general that people salt their food to taste. However, the caveat for that is the kind of salt that you're using. I want to make sure that you're using a natural salt. Celtic sea salt's pretty easy to find. Himalayan pink salt is pretty easy to find. There's a product called Real Salt that I use all the time. You can find it. You can find it at Kroger. It's readily available out there. And so do salt your food to taste. In general, unless you have a pretty severe blood pressure issue, as long as you're using a high quality salt, that's not as much of a problem. Of course, with anything I talk about, do make sure that you consult with your doctor. But generally, when you're using a Celtic sea salt, when you're using pink salt, when you're using salt that has a color to it, the color is telling you that more than one type of mineral is present. When you're using white salt, typically that's just sodium. And you don't want to overload your body with sodium. That can, we'd have to get into a whole nother discussion, but it can compromise your body's ability to manage water and also manage the movement of nutrients in and out of your cells. So first thing I want everyone to remember, please eat in a calm, relaxed state. Sit down, take a few deep breaths. Focus on gratitude, say grace, something to get you in the moment, to get you calm so that you can feel the chair underneath you, you can feel the ground underneath your feet, and you're focusing on the whole experience of eating. When you put food in your mouth, put your utensils down in between each bite. to give yourself time to focus on that food. That usually solves the chewing problem in and of itself, just by bringing awareness to that. And then think about adding an intervention like bitters or potentially hydrochloric acid if you are having heartburn issues, or if you are a person who is noticing that you still feel full 3 or 4 hours after you eat. All right, that is the first half of our conversation about how stress affects digestion and what you can do to start reversing the effects of stress on digestion. Just a reminder, check out the Facebook group. I did put up a link where you can sign up to get the coloring sheet. For those of you who enjoy coloring, or those of you that maybe have kids in the house, you can use the coloring sheet and you can listen to the audio that will review for you the components of digestion and what proper digestion should look like. So thanks everyone. Have a healthy evening, a healthy rest of the month, and I will see you in June.